like, you're not the boss of me. You're not the boss of me.
I know, you can never predict what is going to happen.
Exactly. But Kali, so I'm hoping that we don't have the glitching anymore, because you were really getting into some things. And I kind of want to come back to the Hoodoo Heritage Month and Haiti, and just kind of say a couple words about where we are, in this season. I don't know about you, but do you feel like every year Halloween gets bigger and crazier?
Yes.
Like, I feel like it's not up there with like some of the December holidays yet, but I feel like every year it's getting bigger and crazier and more involved, which, I mean, in a way, it was kind of like always one of my favorites. But I think also El Dia de los Muertos is gaining a lot of purchase also, and has been for the past several years. And, a Mexican holiday, and celebrating the ancestors. So it has a different kind of perspective, in the sense that Halloween goes back to what you were saying about Samhain and the veil being very thin at this time of the year between the worlds of the living and the worlds of the deceased, right? But El Dia de los Muertos, November 1st and 2nd, really is about honoring the ancestors in a way that I feel like Halloween does not. Halloween has a kind of a spookiness and a different relationship with death, whereas El Dia de los Muertos really is about family, loved ones, connection, and being present, and going back to what you were saying earlier about having a practice. I think growing up in a lot of our communities, my mother's Mexican, my father's African American, we spent a lot of time in the graveyards growing up. Yeah, because we're going to go visit your uncle, we're going to go visit your great grandmother, we're going to go visit this one, we're going to go visit that one. And so we were used to growing up spending time in graveyards in a way that wasn't spooky for us. It was also another place that we felt welcome in a way, I guess you would say. And I think that is a different kind of relationship than what you see with most Halloween kind of narratives,
Yeah. I mean, I just always chalk it up to like capitalism to just like strip any, significant culture out of a process. And then, I'm a mom, so Halloween is getting more and more expensive every year.
Yes.
I said,
yes.
Halloween and Christmas about to take me out. So,
I'm telling you.
But it is interesting too, because in looking at it, I'm like, one of the fundamental aspects I think of colonialism, I was talking about it recently with my mother, is when it removes us from the land, we're removed from the cycle of life. Death is just a natural part of a cycle. And most cultures, when they were still rooted in connectivity to the land, were marking their lives and transitions by how the land works. So there's a period where their land needs to regenerate, and there's a period where the trees like appear to be in a dormancy and things die, and that furthers a continued cycle. And Halloween has made death into something spooky and foreign to most of us. And then sometimes in the West, talking to people about ancestral practice can feel like it can feel really spooky. But the truth is like when we are unable to honor death and our dead, we leave a significant portion of our own wisdom off the table. And I think colonization interrupting many of our cultural practices of burial rites, burial traditions was intentional. But then in a weird, not weird, but very intentional way, there is ancestral reverence all around us in the naming of monuments and streets after colonial heroes all the time, right? Statues and Mount Rushmore, what it's been turned into, this honoring of colonial ancestry occurs constantly.
Yes.
But sometimes we're not recognizing that that's what it is.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think, okay, there are a couple things there, honoring the ancestors, but also that idea of having a ritual, a burial ritual, something for the family to have to go through to process, because when a loved one is taken away so immediately, unexpectedly, but the family's not allowed to grieve, there's maybe no body, there's no process, no ritual, that can be very destructive and kind of, factor in grief for generations. When I was in grad school, I was doing some research at UPenn at the anthropology part of the museum in Philly. And I was doing some work on the Samuel G. Morton collection. He's the father of anthropology, but collected a lot of human ephemera, human skulls, mostly indigenous, some African American, some Pacific Islander. And it just so happened the time that I was there, there was also a group from the Smithsonian Natural History Museum who was doing a project on scalping. And I found a skull that I believed it wasn't properly labeled, but I believe it was part of his original collection. And it was in a Ziploc bag, okay? And so I took it to the Smithsonian group to take a look at it. And, they identified her as, well, it did say Pawnee on there, but Pawnee Indian, early 20s, and she suffered from blunt force trauma. We don't know if that was the cause of death or what it was, but put her back in the Ziploc bag. And it was a very difficult situation that I had to put her, this young Pawnee woman, her skull, back in a Ziploc bag. And the museum has come under fire a lot lately because of its refusal to, repatriate human remains and that sort of thing. So when you don't have a ritual, when you don't have a practice for grieving, where does that grief go?
Yeah.
I think there's something that happens on a cellular level. It goes in our bodies and it gets trapped in that DNA. And that's why we end up carrying that grief from previous generations, because somehow it was never really processed, or it's just too heavy and it came down through our DNA. And here we are here today. And that's why this work is important.
Yes. My Dagara elder, his name was Dr. Malidoma Patrice Somé, and he did, and also Sabonfu Somé, I want to lift them both up. They're ancestors now, but they brought so much indigenous African wisdom from their peoples to the West. And it's so amazing to have something that's still indigenous, hasn't been touched by colonization, that we can connect to. And in that community, grief is considered a communal healing process. When someone passes and there's a transition, everyone is to grieve. If you are not grieving, it's considered you're like keeping that soul from reaching into the next plane. And the grief is the water that washes them there. So it's a communal act to grieve. Everyone must grieve. So the community has a place to grieve using this life, everything they've been holding, right? This collective purging. And with the loss of that connectivity to waters, to the communal water, to water itself and land, it gives way to an overabundance of fire in a society. That's their view. And fire is the element that represents ancestors. So when those ancestors are not processed, those dead are not processed, it comes out in an excessive amount of fire in a community. And if you look at the West, we have so little connectivity to water. When you get assimilated into the dominant culture, this Western hegemony. And what we have is an overabundance of firepower, weapons, bullets, bombs, right? As we're talking about waiting on a weapons embargo to happen, right? Like, we're looking at, in the Dagara cosmology, what we're witnessing is these ancestors are not processed. If the people who die are not able to be grieved to wash over to a place, they're unable to assist us in transforming the world we're living in now, which is their role. And I think it's important, like when I'm talking to people about ancestral practice and they feel kind of skittish, is to situate what it is in a larger framework, which is to say that the people who come before you, their role, the reason that we are uplifting them is because it's their role to reach and uplift our life. That's their role. They're here to assist us. And these rituals are to help position them to do the work they need to do. So when we have these harmful patterns, the ancestors can now see how harmful what they initiated was. And they need to be brought back into our community to say, great, now that you see it, help us get a shovel. We're going to dig it up, right? And that type of connectivity is present. And if we have to, like you were saying, like the graveyard, going to the graveyard is not spooky because family's here. Love is here. And understanding that these bonds of connection through DNA are not severed. Family continues to be family, whether they are living or on this side, they are family. And just as you would go to a grandmother, right, to say, I need some help, and you might trust that she would help. In the same way, these ancestors are here. And if they're not able to help, it's like, well, let me help you so you can help me. Because we are family. And this is family business. Living good lives, caring for children, turning the society into something that is free is family and livable business. Yes.
I like that you said it's family business, because family could be our blood family, our blood relatives, but it also could be our chosen family. It could be our community. And I think our communities, we might have some kind of semblance and practice of grieving, in the sense, usually it comes after a violent episode. We might have a candlelight vigil or something like that. But I'm wondering, what would it look like to have a healthy, unprovoked, handling of family business, where everybody, let's get in the living room. We're having a family meeting. I feel like everybody's going through something right now, on a very personal level, even children, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so what does it mean for us to heal, to process grief? And if I could just go back to one thing you said, I could shout when you talked about helping others grieve, because even from the records that we have about what happened in the slave ship holds, down in the holds, if you have, men and women were separated. I read some places where if a woman was passing, she was dying, and there were other women there, even though they didn't speak the same language, they weren't from the same tribe, they all helped her pass on, and they grieved together. Like they were no longer strangers. It's it kind of reminds me of like queer Atlantic, Black Atlantic, that sort of thing. It's definitely a queering of it. And so there was an instinctive, but also a ritualized practice of, this is what we do when this happens. We come together, and it was in the most tragic and traumatic situation, to find that kind of love and beauty, still there. It's very powerful. And I'm wondering, what does that look like for us today, to create these livable situations, and handle family business? What do you think?
Listen, Lord, it can be just as simple as the conversations we have with the grandma, like we used to. It can be just as simple. And it can get, in some communities, it can be really much more elaborate, right? Like, there's a dedicated place within a family where the photos of ancestors and those who've come before us are there. It can be the family Bible that's got the written archive of everyone who's had it, right? It can be a permanent fixture in one's house. I do have an ancestral altar, and on this altar, it's a place that I say my children can go. I say, these your people too? Go talk to them if you need to. where their names are there and their photos are there. It's only photos of those who have transitioned and items, and it's a communication. When I first started, I would have a weird impulse to put something there, and I wouldn't know why. And then somehow you hear a story from a family member who will say, "Oh, you know, she loves so and such," and I'm like, "Oh, that's so interesting," you know.
Wow.
And so it can be just as simple. I think the important thing for those who are looking to connect to ancestors is to realize that you are the crossroads.
Yes. And, you know, I love to hear people talk about their own altars at home. I mean, I love it right now. And maybe this goes back to the water you were talking about, but I have lots of seashells on mine. And I have big seashells. I have little seashells. I have to have that water element, but then I have all my crystals there. I have my pictures there. I might put a little piece of jewelry or something like shiny, metallic. And then I have cigars on mine. I have, because my dad was a cigar aficionado, so I have that there. I know some people like to include like maybe their favorite beverage, alcohol, tequila, whiskey, atole, whatever it was they like to drink. What else do you like to put on yours?
Ooh, so I have Newports for my dad.
Newports. Yeah.
Like, since this was your thing, I'm gonna put them here for you. I always keep some water up there. I usually have something that represents each of the elements. So there's like incense or maybe cedar or sage. Water, there's always a plant up there. And then some, as like my own personal practice has evolved, now there's different items that represent something symbolic that I want them to connect to and feels connective. And you know, it's so interesting. Okay, so I do this workshop, this Writing as Ancestral Connection workshop that guides people through the elements, because in the Daguerre, the elements are also ancestors. And so it's all connected. Sometimes your ancestors will live in a tree or live in certain trees, live in rocks.
A duppy tree.
Yes.
They call it a duppy tree. Duppy. If anybody's interested, you can look it up.
That's so Trini. Yes.
Duppy tree.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's all these things are overlapped, and so guiding people through who don't know anything about it, right? And we'll get to one spot. And the first time I did it, it was at Colgate University, and I always laugh because there was a young woman there, and as we were going through and we were sharing some of the like symbolism and totems that come up, right?
Yeah.
She's like, when I stepped forward, I was stepping on snow. And I didn't understand that. And I said, "Oh, where are your people from?" She said, "I'm from California." I said, No, girl. Where are your people from? She's like, "Minnesota." "No, girl, where are they from?" She's like, "Oh, we're Polish." I said, "Girl,
Yes.
let's put it." You know, so it's funny, like once you open up the communication, like different symbols that are very personal, and I think that's important for people to. It becomes very, very personal. What you put, because you start to realize there's symbolic attachments to things. You know, I wonder the connectivity with you and water, right? Like your people's in water, right? Like, you know, I would just wonder, like, you know, were they fishermen or people who had like what is this deep relationship with water that might be so specific, and so we don't know the stories anymore, but the impulse in us comes out in symbols and items and totems and songs and resonances that we don't understand, you know.
And how much of that is really subconscious? I mean, now that you're saying this, I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, my dad was a Navy man. So now, I mean, I'm just now putting it together. Okay. We were water babies, you know, we always have to have that water element, but that makes sense. And I think some of this, if people are struggling, if they wanted to know, well, I don't know what to put on my altar, I don't know how to call this in, Meditation helps. I find that go into a meditative state and just clear your mind and focus on these things, and they will come to you. And you will start to see, okay, well, this is the path forward that I need to go down. Absolutely. Meditation helps a lot with this. If anybody's interested, like, oh, how should I get started?
Yeah, so you can clear your mind. And usually, like I'll say, if someone were to begin, just like, in Dagara, the color is red. But white is always a good, universal color, just like a little white cloth or a napkin. If you're on the go, sometimes I have to use it like a little napkin, a candle, and maybe just names, maybe one photo. It's just very simple. And, just as you pass it, saying, hey, every time hey, just acknowledging it energetically, because it's like, it's so simple. It's like calling a grandma, and when they know that you're calling, they're like, oh, you're calling me?
Yes.
And
yes. We miss you. We love you.
Yeah. There's no wrong way it's your people. There's no wrong way, it's your people. And that relationship will be so personal. And so there's, we can draw on traditions for help, because that helps, to say, okay, a candle, some water, and some photos. We have these different models that this is a universal, some food that you may want to give, or food, that they liked. If you're adopted, or lineages are kind of, tricky, you may not know those things. You don't have to know those things. Just the desire to connect, and desire to connect with those who love you, right? And that is all you need. So sometimes I'll hear stuff just because I'm talking out loud. I'm like, y'all better come help me with this.
Yes.
Y'all better help.
We're right here.
Yes. And remembering that this relationship is not, you're not praying to them. You're not, for people who maybe come from Christian backgrounds and feel like it's, you're not praying to them. You are asking family to help. And we should feel comfortable to ask family to help. So if there are important things, go ask your family to help. Those who love you, no matter if they're alive or they're not. They love you.
They do. They will show up for you.
Yes. If we let them, but they're not going to intervene if we don't, right? Like a mother, right? A mother may say, I want to help, but if you don't tell me and you're not, if you don't let me, I'm going to watch, not because I don't love you, because I have to allow you to have your free will. So sometimes we have to go to our loved ones who are in a different a different side of life as we know it, and say, I have this problem that's been happening, and can you help me find a solution? Can you help? And then you just watch for signs or knowings, and you just trust it,
Exactly. And you'll start to, sometimes they'll show up in the answer themselves. Like, if the person that comes to help me figure out a situation, and I'm meeting them for the first time, they have the same first name as my dad, or something, there are those kind of, synchronicities that start to line up, you know what I mean?
Yes.
That you're like, oh, wow, okay.
It's so good. Because it's like, sometimes I think about it, I'm like, wow, to feel that when people pass on is the end of the story is really sad.
Yeah.
It's just so much love left on the table, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that feels really sad. And I feel like with my children, I tell them, I'm like, one day I will pass. But if you think I would ever leave you, no matter, like, I would not. If I could be right up under you, I would continue to be, right? If there's that possibility, like, I would never, like, if I transition and now I have no legs and I can just, like, be, what do you need? Like, totally, I'm there,
I think that is such an important question, important thing a conversation to have with children, is that, okay, one day I'm not going to be here. One thing my dad used to rehearse that with me, he would say, now, one day daddy's not going to be here with you. And then he would say, but if you ever start missing the old man, just go look in the mirror, because that's where I'll be. And he would be so cheerful about it. And I'd be crying like, Daddy, don't say that. Don't go. He said, if you ever start missing the old man, just go look in the mirror, because that's where I'll be. And he would rehearse that with me, because he was sick off and on for some time. And so I was always prepared as much as possible when that transition, when that transition happens. And he wasn't just saying, go look in the mirror because you look like me. I am him. That's who we are. We are our parents, and so he was just saying, I'm always going to be here. You're crying my tears, because if I stop, I'm going to cry too.
That's so beautiful. Yeah.
And that's an important conversation that we have to have with our children, that no matter what, we're always going to be here with you. Mommy loves you. Daddy loves you, and I think that does help. I mean, even though they may not want to hear it, because it's a very difficult thing.
Yeah.
But I think just changing our relationship with death from that Western, late capitalist, racial capitalist kind of perspective to more indigenous practices, really, that's where we find a lot of our healing space, right?
Yes. Oh my God. I'm sorry. That's so beautiful. Ooh, it's so beautiful. And it's perfect, because it really sums up like the core of what this is, like this is about like honoring love and connectivity. And then there's also this other side, like where I find a lot of people feel, and me too, right? When my father passed in 2019, and I made a whole art show about it just to figure out like how to deal with the grief of grieving someone, number one, who had abandoned me, and then number two, is a grief that's unrecognized. My father was a dishonorable man. I'm like, death doesn't erase any of that. And similarly, there's some of us, right, like we embody the DNA of so many colonizers as well. And I feel sometimes there's people who are like, I refuse to acknowledge my European ancestors because of how it came into the DNA. And so, or there's some fear about like what happens when I hit like a colonial ancestor. And I think that's something to explore. And where I'm at right now is the conversation with my father is ongoing, because he left a mess. He left me a mess, y'all. Mess.
And that's where the forgiveness has to come in. And not necessarily, forgiveness is a tricky thing, because a lot of folks think, oh, I'm excusing bad behavior. It's not about excusing bad behavior. It's about releasing yourself from carrying the burden and the bags of the pain, right? And finding that forgiveness it's like Louise Hay says, it's a gift we give ourselves, because some of these relationships are complicated, right?
Yeah, at best. Yeah, truly. And I think just for those who may have that, right, there are redemptions available, because I firmly believe in atonement. And I think part of also ancestral practice is opening the road to atonement, and saying to some of these folks, like my father, is like, you're gonna clean this mess up. You left a mess, right? Like, I'm still shoveling your cuckoo poo-poo that you made with your sordid life. And that didn't go away, right? And nothing absolves that. It continues, right? The traumas that some of our people have left behind are not solved, and we're carrying them generation to generation. And so I also encourage people in the Dagard tradition that I learned ancestral veneration in this way. You tell them with very strong language. You tell them to come and do it. And we were like, can we do that? He's like, yes, you must do it. Not can you, you must do it. You must tell them. And how we started off is you tell them what has happened since they've been gone. So it would, for like my father, would be like, hey, since you died, you left this behind. I have this paperwork to fill. I'm still processing what it means to be a daughter who was abandoned in a world,
Yes.
as a Black woman. I'm still, this pattern is continuing. You continue to pattern into me that I'm trying to break, and I didn't start it, and you maybe didn't start it, but you better come and help me fix it. So on behalf of me, you're going to help sort this paperwork. You're going to make this as easy as possible for me. Open up the roads, open up the doors for this to be solved. You're going to make sure that you are a good grandpa to my daughter. You're going to be the protector over her. Since you didn't do it in life, you're going to do it in death. Hey, that's your job, this little one.
Yeah.
And knowing that they know what they've done. I can feel my father's remorse now that he can see what he did.
Sure, yes.
I don't feel any fight. And I feel like it's okay sometimes with some of those where abuse is intersecting, that if you don't want to touch them, it's fine.
Yeah.
You don't. But my father had a wonderful mother, and my grandmother is a loving presence. And so I feel that way with our European colonial ancestors too, right? The person who initiated this entry into the DNA could have been through really horrible traumatic means, and you may not want to claim them, but their lineage has a gift for you, and it is your birthright, and you should call and claim, because there may be others who are not like them. Grandmothers, grandfathers, and inherited ancestors who are saying 500 years before colonization, 1,000, 10,000 years, who are saying, no, but beyond race, I have gift for you. You're still mine. I claim you, and I know they did wrong, but I'm here to offer benefit in spite of that. And I also want to, give people that too, right? Beyond the harmful ancestors are still families who are still primed to love you, and you don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't like that saying, by the way. That's a weird saying.
Don't throw babies.
Don't throw babies at all. Not even with bathwater.
But I just, I'm always cautious about like falling into like the single storyline, like Chimamanda talks about, and indeed there were those predatory relationships with racial and social hierarchies with our European ancestry, but sometimes it was love.
Yes, sometimes
it was love. I don't think those stories are highlighted as much, because it's like, wait a minute, you have oftentimes it's a white man and a Black woman, and a lot of times those stories were not popularized, and instead they were they made into this pejorative idea of the tragic mulatto, right? The tragic mulatto. But some of those relationships did come from a space of love. Was there still inequity in terms of racial and social hierarchies? Absolutely. But sometimes two souls find each other and they love each other. And then here we are today.
Yes, it's so true. And the single narrative is dangerous, because if there's nothing we don't know about humans, it's that we are complex.
Yes.
We are so complex, and the family tree doesn't share the story. If we want this story, that's where we have to get into our own bone wisdom, our own body as the archive of ancestral story, and recognizing that sometimes what we're drawn to is because we are still holding the archive. But the family tree don't tell, and it doesn't. And even the family tree doesn't include our queer ancestors, right? Like the adopted ancestors and the ancestors who come in through love, who have chosen family through love and not bloodline,
Yes. But I like that you did touch on this idea of how complicated these things can be when you have troubled souls that pass on, who leave a lot of stuff behind, that the process of healing and forgiveness is still a practice. And part of that can be ritualized, but I love this idea of healing, because I'm telling you, everybody's going through something. Everybody's got something that they're dealing with, and finding ways to communicate, in a way that's healthy and healing, so that we also find the healing within ourselves for our children, right? For the next generation.
Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love just this notion from like African indigenous practices that ancestors are to help clear the line for 16 generations,
Oh,
forward and backwards.
uh-huh.
And when we look at the studies about epigenetics and trauma, we know that trauma carries, right, for generations in the
Absolutely.
bloodline. So it makes sense that these indigenous practices around the world who were venerating ancestors for them to help assist the community, there was a technology in that, a very, scientific technology in that, which is to say, we have to have them to help us clear the bloodline so that we can keep it clear, right? And I'm like, oh, so this is why they were doing this notion of the ancestors are supposed to help clear and remove blockages for 16 generations. That's their role, because we know that trauma is passed on. And so we need somebody on the other side also helping to assist us in present and healing and setting new patterns and opening doors. And also it just is beautiful. I like, this practice where you walk into a door and you hold it open for the person behind you. And thinking about death is that same transition. They pass through and they're holding open a door, they're holding open a door we're holding open a door for them to come, and they're holding open a door because when we don't have good relationship to death, we will also pass through the same way. We're going the same road. And so like honoring, having practices like Dia de los Muertos, or having a place and talking to them, or Fet Gede, which is the same weekend, November 1st and 2nd, or just the Hoodoo the Hoodoo practices, or the family Bible, right? Your grandmother has all the photos of everybody on her mantle. Doesn't name it anything, just recognizes that it's important to see those people. We know that those are the people holding that door open for us when it's our time, and I think that helps take some of the stigma out of the fear of death,
Definitely. And I think it also helps, going back to what you were saying about the 16 generations, this kind of, indigenous African way of thinking about shifting our perspective. I think it also helps to shift our perspective around time. I think in terms of like a Western, Platonic, linear, past, present, and then the future, and then what happened back there, oh, that has nothing to do with me. And so, but the future is way out there. But a kind of African-centered way of thinking about time, whether it's cyclical or spiral, or however you want to look at it. I'm thinking about like Black quantum futurism and the work that's going into that. To really reshape our perspective that time isn't this linear thing that just happened in the past and now we're here and then something happens way out there, that it's happening now. And then that creates a space for us to connect with the ancestors instead of thinking, oh, that has nothing to do with me.
I love that you brought up Black quantum futurists, because that really, I have the books from them, and they really inspired my last show, which was called A Maroon's Guide to Time and Space.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, that's it.
And so I use Harriet Tubman to guide us through this like multi-dimensional underground railroad to freedom in another multiverse, right? And
absolutely.
But one of it's my favorite part. But one of the places is like Harriet Tubman becomes a DJ, and DJ's a house track. But the house track is literally, it's a song to Agun, which is in the Yoruba tradition, made into like a, for ancestors. And I liken ancestral time in the African sense to the way that we layer a musical track, right? With this, right? That these are all layered on top of each other, right? You add in the drum track and then you add in the vocals. And so through the creation of this track in this one scene, you're understanding how the nature of time is not linear, it's not Greenwich time. African practice, African traditions say that time is multi-layered, right? And it can be a looping track, but so many people are contributing. It's a polyrhythmic blend,
Yes.
right? So your ancient ancestors are creating one baseline, and we're interacting with that baseline, adding our own,
Yes.
you know, instrumentation through our life. And so instead, it's a weaving. It's a weave. It's not a line. It's a weaving, right? And a musical weaving for those who are musical, right?
Yes.
So my father's track, you know, the syncopation of it might be really jarring, right? Really hard, but because I'm interacting with his life even continuously, his storyline continues, and now I'm adding onto this like really tumultuous track, like a really beautiful melodic quality. So together, it actually, you know, it creates a jam.
Yeah, you're gonna throw that Alice Coltrane harp on there, and that kind of elevates it. You know, it just creates this kind of high vibrational thing. But then you got that gritty bass line, Daddy's gritty bass line underneath. Yeah. But it's all coming together. You know, we're gonna work this out, Daddy.
Yes. Yeah, and you know, when my father first died, I didn't know if I should have an altar, if I should put him on it. I mean, he's a horrible man. I'm not being, you know, pejorative. I'm not even being hyperbolic. But the Babalawo I went to, he said, well, did you know what his life purpose was? What his destiny was? I said, no. He said, oh. So how do you know part of his destiny wasn't to come here to like knock everything off the table, do everything he wasn't supposed to do? Because have any of you done any of the things he's done? I said, no. So how do you know he wasn't meant to clear the line, right?
Wow.
Wow. And yeah, so it gives you, it just is to say that, yeah, these stories are not static. We're interacting with timelines and people that are living and breathing. And when you look at it like from a larger lens and not that singular narrative of one person's life is singular, but this is a part of a weaving, a pattern. Overall, you might say, well, that darkness of that person's life created the perfect shadowing for this beautiful, you know, image that is being created by the rest of us. And without it, you know, it just wouldn't have the depth that it has. So you know, holding two things in one hand sometimes is tricky with our own loved ones and the stories, because there is redemption. I moved away from forgiveness because it just feels so loaded for me as a person, and I just go with redemption, right? Like, can I redeem? Is there something redeemable here that I can use? Because I don't feel I'm tired of forgiving abuse and things. I'm sorry, we're good. Yeah. But if I can,
Bob Marley called it a redemption song for a reason.
Yeah, because anything can be redeemed, right? And I can say that story is horrific, and yet I can create on top of it and with it and coinciding with it, and that can feel like something.
Yeah, and I think there's something very powerful in that. I mean, it's an exercise of your own power. And the power of redemption and changing the story going forward, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah. Oh, well, we're entering into some very special, powerful times right now with Halloween coming up, Dia de los Muertos, and tell us what else is coming up on the calendar.
Oh, yes. So if you're here and you're looking for a place to begin a connection or explore new ways to connect to what might be in your DNA from your ancestors, what you're keeping in this archive, next Saturday, Friday, November. I said next Saturday, Friday. It's November 1st, which is a Friday, from 6 to 8 on Zoom. I'll be doing a Writing as Ancestral workshop where I guide us through an experience through the elements, and I root it in the Dagara cosmology of Burkina Faso, specifically Dano, Burkina Faso.
Oh, Burkina Faso, really? Oh, wow. Shout out to Burkina Faso. They've been so much. Oh, wow, wow, wow.
Yes, and ancestors Malidoma Sobe and Sabonfu Somé, because they've given us just this really beautiful cosmology that we can interact with, and it's also universal. I'm finding it in ancient Celtic practice, and
Oh, wow.
Indigenous
Nice.
practice, these same approaches to connectivity with the land and ancestors and spirits and waters and community at large, and ritual as a language to communicate. And so that is Friday, November 1st from 6 to 8 p.m. And you can go to my page. If you follow me, I can just DM you the link to register.
Okay, everybody's got that. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today.
Yes.
Thank you for taking the time and for all of your comments and everything. I want to thank Candice. I want to thank Oak Cliff Cultural Center for hosting us today. And everybody, just give a little bit more love to yourself and open up that door for the ancestors to also come through and help you. Any last words, Candice?
I want to thank you. It's been so great to be in conversation with you and to learn so much from you. And I want to just pour a little water and give a little light and energy to all of us and our ancestors and all of the complexity and beauty of our lineages.
That's right. All right. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye. Bye.
Okay.
Oh my God.
I don't know if I
You just press the. Yeah, that's perfect. And then out.
Try it again.